Hello, everyone. My name is Vahe Baboomian. I'm from the University of California, Irvine, and today I'll be talking to you about condensed phase photochemical aging of secondary organic aerosol and its effects on viscosity. This work is a collaboration between us at UCI and Alan Bertram's group at UBC, University of British Columbia. So jumping into it, this talk is going to be talking about photochemical aging. And so this is more of a photolytic type where we can say, okay, we have a newly formed aerosol, secondary organic aerosol, and you have some sunlight present, and that's going ahead and irradiate the particle. And so there's molecules inside the aerosol that are going to get excited from the sunlight, and they'll go into an excited state. Once they get in that state, they can actually break apart and fragment into smaller, more volatile pieces, and then they'll evaporate into the gas phase. So these VOCs are things like carbon monoxide, acetic acid, and small acids like this that usually come out of SOA photolysis. And so once this happens, you actually lose mass. So that's what we did in our previous study. We looked at the percent mass loss as a function of time spent in the Los Angeles atmosphere for a variety of different SOA types. And what's important to see here is that, okay, when we have sunlight present, we lose mass. So we have the percent mass loss going up. But more importantly, after about a week in the atmosphere, you can see that you actually reach a plateau. So all these curves start flattening out. And what that means is you have some fraction of SOA that remains that won't degrade any further with sunlight. And so that's what we're calling this photorecalcitrant fraction that remains. So we wanted to do in this study is say, okay, well, this photorecalcitrant fraction exists, but why doesn't it degrade? What's the viscosity of it? So this is one of the questions we wanted to answer. So again, if we have a newly formed aerosol, it could have the viscosity of something like honey. But by going through this aging process, it can possibly increase in viscosity and have a viscosity of something more like peanut butter. And so this is important because viscosity affects the mixing times within particles, the chemical reactivity, transport of pollutants, as well as its ice cloud formation ability. So first we need to make some aerosol. So we used our flow cell here. This is basically some clean air coming in and mixing in with our VOC, which is limonene here, being pumped in through a syringe pump where it comes into the inlet of our flow tube. On the other hand, we have an oxygen tank that's forming ozone through our ozone generator. We measure its concentration, and then it mixes in with our VOC, and we start forming aerosol before it goes through an ozone denuder, and then we collect it onto this fluoropel-coated slide. So it's basically a hydrophobic coating on there, and we collect for a few hours actually to get particles. They're these aggregated super particles. So we collect this so they clump up all together, and they're big enough so you can actually see with your naked eye over here. And we do that so we can do viscosity measurements with it, which I'll talk to you in a bit about. So first, we need to age our particles. So we take that same slide that we collected on with these aggregated superparticles, and we put it into a chamber here with some clean air flowing through it. We have a 305 nanometer LED sitting on top of it, and it irradiates the particles right on top. And we do this for about 10 days of Los Angeles atmospheric exposure. We do the same thing, put it in the same chamber just without an LED, and that's our control or unaged sample. So we did this and we sent these samples off to Alan Bertram's lab where they do their poke flow viscosity measurements. And so if you've never seen this, it's basically you take that slide, you put it in this humidified box, you have a needle sitting on top of the particles, and there's a camera looking up at it with a microscope objective. And so you can actually, what you do is you have a picture of the particle here. This is one of them looking up at it. This is before poking. And so what you do is you take this needle and you poke it and you create a hole inside the particle. You remove the needle and you wait to see how long it takes for the hole to recover. And depending on how long that takes, you can actually calculate out the viscosity of it. The longer it takes to recover, the higher the viscosity. And so we did this for here, I'm showing you for limonene ozonolysis unaged, the black points. This is the viscosity as a function of relative humidity. And you can see at 0% RH, viscosity is about 10 to the 5 Pascal seconds, and it goes down with increasing humidity due to water uptake. And then the interesting thing here is once you age it, it actually jumps up by about 4 orders of magnitude. So it's quite a substantial jump. And this actually translates to higher mixing times of organics also. So this is the time it takes for an organic molecule to mix within the particle. This is assuming a 200 nanometer particle here. And you can see all of these points for the unaged sample are below the 1 hour mark. And this is important because there's this assumption that semi-volatile species usually reach gas particle equilibrium within an hour under most parts of the troposphere. And that's true for limonene unaged samples here. But if you have aged samples, it's actually not true under most of the relative humidity conditions. They're actually quite a bit higher than 1 hour up until you reach about 60% RH. And then that's the assumption starts holding true again. But I thought that was really interesting. And we wanted to look at the composition changes to see, okay, well, we have this viscosity increasing, but chemically what's going on that's causing this viscosity to go up? And so we did some mass spectrometry analysis to look at the composition. And here the black peaks are the unaged SOA, the red peaks are the aged SOA. And you can see we have this nice monomer, dimer, and trimer region in the unaged SOA versus in the aged SOA, you kind of get this continuum that's forming. And you can actually see that more clearly here, showing you the number of carbon atoms per assigned molecule in the sample. And this is with percent abundance. So all the black peaks add up to 100%, all the red peaks add up to 100%. And so again, the black ones, you can see the monomer, dimer, and trimer region versus the aged one, you get this continuum and you start filling in the gaps between the different regions. And then this also, you can look at some metrics from the mass spectrometry. The average molecular weight went up from 281 to 314 grams per mole after aging. So it went up about 12%. The oxygen to carbon ratio per assigned compound went from 0.47 to 0.55, up by 17%. And the average hydrogen to carbon ratio went up from 1.52 to 1.42. Sorry, went down that much, about 7%. So overall, we're getting larger molecules that are more oxidized. And so we think this is what was causing this increase in viscosity. But to further check it, we actually took all this mass spectrometry data, took the composition and plugged it into a parameterization model. And this is the one by Drew et al. In the 2018 paper. And basically what it does is it takes the composition of your material and it predicts out what the viscosity of that material should be based on the chemical composition. And so I've overlapped it here with our experimental data. So the red diamond here is the aged prediction. The black one is the unaged prediction. And you can see it overestimates it compared to our experimental findings. But the important thing here is that there's a relative increase between the unaged and aged sample. So even the prediction sees an increase of about 3 orders of magnitude. And so from this, we can say, okay, well, this change in viscosity that we're seeing is because of this chemical change, because the parameterization is also kind of seeing the similar effect, at least by 3 orders of magnitude. And then to see what the effects of this would be kind of globally, we took these viscosity measurements and we put into a global distribution model to look at the global distribution of glassy aerosol. And so here I'm showing you the unaged one here. This is altitude, latitude, and the color scheme is TG over T. And basically the way you can read this is, to simplify it, if it's over 1, that means you have a glassy aerosol. It means you have a very viscous aerosol where it starts behaving like glass. And that's this black curve here. So you can see you'll have glassy aerosol at about 9 kilometers and above if you have unaged aerosols. But if you take into account the photochemistry and looking at the aged version, you can see you can already have glassy aerosol at much lower altitudes. So from 2 to 7 kilometers and above, you'll already have glassy aerosol. And this also corresponds to increased particle mixing times, like I said. So we looked at that distribution as well. So here, the black line here is the 1 hour mark for the organic mixing time. Anything above it means it's taking longer. So you have particle mixing times greater than 1 hour at 3 kilometers and above for the unaged aerosols, versus for the aged one, you can already start having particle mixing times greater than 1 hour, even at 0 kilometers to 4 kilometers, depending on your latitude. But so this assumption that it's 1 hour might not hold true under most situations in the globe, actually, if the aerosols are aged. And so from this, we'd like to conclude that long-term UV aging of SOA leads to an increase in viscosity. In the case of limonene ozonolysis SOA that we looked at here, it was at least 4 orders of magnitude. And the parameterization based on mass spectrometry also saw it go up by about 3 orders of magnitude. So there's some agreement going on there. So we think this is actually the mass change, the composition changes that are causing this change in viscosity. And we saw an increase in molecular weight and oxidation, and it's broadening carbon distribution. And then from this, we can conclude that SOA particles in the upper troposphere will become glassy after several days in the air. And then this will lead to increased long-range transport of pollutants, longer gas particle equilibrium timescales, and slower multi-phase chemistry. And so I'd like to acknowledge my group, the Niskardov Lab, Professor Sergey Niskardov, Professor Alan Bertram, the Niskardov Group, the Bertram Group, Jesse, who did all the poke flow measurements, the AAAR travel grant, NSF for funding, and you all for your attention. Thank you.